Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into complex topics, grab the most vital information, and turn you into an expert in minutes.
And today, we're tackling something really fundamental. We're talking about the basic energy pathways of life on Earth.
Yeah, trophic levels. It sounds fancy, but it's basically about who eats whom, and maybe more importantly, why that matters.
Exactly. Our mission today is to dig into the source material, pull out the core ideas behind, the food pyramid,
Uh,
how energy moves through an ecosystem.
we'll be looking closely at the different tiers, primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers.
And we're going to unpack probably the single most important rule in all of ecology. It really governs how these systems work.
Okay, so let's frame this whole dive with a big question, and I want you, listening, to really pause and think about this one for a second. If you picture the absolute top of a food chain, maybe a huge great white shark or a massive Kodiak bear,
Hmm.
why can't that chain just keep going, level after level?
Yeah, why not a super predator that eats the bear?
Right. What is the fundamental, almost mathematical reason that limits how big these animals get, how many of them there can be, and even how many links you can have in that chain?
Ah, that's the perfect starting point because the answer really comes down to energy, specifically how efficiently energy gets transferred.
Yep.
Every single ecosystem, whether it's a super busy coral reef or just a quiet field, is built on this energy flow. And the key thing, the absolute takeaway, is that usable energy drops off dramatically as you move up each level away from the original source.
Right, okay. So let's start at the bottom. Well, not the very bottom, that's the producers. The plants using sunlight.
Right, photosynthesis, the base layer.
So the level right above that, the second trophic level, primary consumers.
Okay, primary consumers. These are basically the first eaters, you could say. They are the organisms that eat the producers directly.
So the herbivores.
Exactly, the classic plant eaters.
Think about, a cow munching grass, a deer browsing leaves, a rabbit nibbling clover,
Mm,
even a tiny grasshopper on a blade of grass.
Yep, all relying purely on that stored solar energy locked up in the plants.
And their role seems pretty straightforward, but it's crucial, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely vital. They're taking that chemical energy, which is stored in like the cellulose of plants, and they're converting it into animal biomass, flesh, muscle,
Yeah.
energy that other animals can actually
This
use.
make the sun's energy accessible to the rest of the food chain.
Precisely.
Okay, so that brings us to our first kind of challenge question for you listening. If these primary consumers are only eating plants, why are there usually so many of them?
Yeah.
Like just vast numbers compared to the predators higher up. Why herds of antelope, but only a few lion prides?
That's a great question to set up the next point. It really comes down to, well, sheer volume and energy availability.
Okay.
Their huge numbers are almost a requirement for the system to work. They have to eat massive amounts of plant material just to get enough energy to live.
Right, because plants aren't super energy dense for them.
Not compared to meat, no. And crucially, there need to be enough of them, enough biomass, to actually support even the small populations of the animals that eat them in the next level up. They're like the energy foundation.
Got it. That makes sense. They form this huge base layer of energy. Okay, so that naturally leads us up the ladder. Let's climb to the third trophic level, secondary consumers.
Okay, secondary consumers. These are the organisms that eat the primary consumers.
So now we're one step removed from the plants, from the sun's direct energy.
Exactly. These are often your carnivores, your meat eaters. Think foxes, wolves, snakes, frogs.
Or sometimes omnivores, right? Animals that eat both plants and other animals.
Yeah, they can fit in here too, depending on what they're eating at that moment. It gets complicated quickly.
And the links here are really tight. I remember seeing a thought experiment in the research material about this. Like, what happens if, say, the rabbit population in an area suddenly crashes? Rabbits being primary consumers.
Ah, yes. What happens to the foxes, the secondary consumers that rely on them?
Well, if you're just following the energy, the answer seems pretty stark. Fewer rabbits
Means the energy supply for the foxes basically dries up almost overnight.
yeah, their food source is gone.
Yeah.
So the fox population would likely plummet pretty quickly.
It shows just how dependent each level is on the one directly below it. There's no buffer.
Which brings us to the next rung up that we're looking at today, the fourth trophic level, tertiary consumers.
The tertiary consumers.
Mhm.
These are the animals that prey on the secondary consumers.
Okay, so these are often the really big predators, right? The ones we think of as being at the top.
Often, yes. They're frequently the apex predators in their particular ecosystem. That means they have few, if any, natural enemies hunting them.
So we're talking about animals like a big bear, a bald eagle hunting fish, a large shark in the ocean, or maybe a killer whale.
Exactly. And what's really interesting and ties back to our opening question is that their relatively low numbers aren't just about being big and powerful.
It's about the energy again.
It's fundamentally about the energy. There's just not enough energy flowing up that far to support huge populations of them.
And ecologically, even though there aren't many of them, their role is massive,
Yeah.
according to the sources.
Oh, monumental. Apex predators are incredibly important for keeping an ecosystem balanced.
How so?
Well, they control the populations of the secondary consumers. By eating them, they prevent those secondary consumers from becoming too numerous and wiping out the primary consumers.
Ah, so they protect the herbivores by eating the animals that eat the herbivores.
Kind of, yeah. Which, in turn, protects the plants at the bottom. So their presence helps maintain the stability of the entire structure if you remove them.
The whole thing you get thrown out of whack.
Absolutely. The whole biological structure can start to wobble or even collapse.
Okay, this feels like the perfect time to introduce that iron law you mentioned. The thing that really limits everything.
Yeah.
The 10% rule.
Yes. This is it. This is the core mathematical constraint of ecology that answers your big question about why food chains can't go on forever.
Let's use that simple example food chain from the sources to make it clear. It was sun gives energy to
Grass, which is eaten by,
a cow, the primary consumer.
which is then eaten by a wolf, the secondary consumer.
And finally, the wolf is eaten by a bear, the tertiary consumer in this chain.
Okay, a nice simple line. Now here's the kicker. Every time energy moves from one level to the next, when the cow eats the grass or the wolf eats the cow, only about 10% of the energy from the lower level actually gets incorporated into the biomass of the upper level.
Only 10%. So where does the other 90% go? Does it just disappear?
Well, not disappear exactly. It's not destroyed, but it's lost from that chain, lost for the purpose of being eaten by the next level up.
Ah.
Most of it is lost as heat, just basic metabolic processes moving around, breathing, maintaining body temperature. Animals burn a lot of energy just staying alive.
Right. If you're that cow, most of the energy you got from the grass you ate is used up walking, digesting, maybe running from that wolf, staying warm.
Exactly. Plus, not all parts of an organism are digestible. Bones, fur, some plant fibers. That just passes through as waste. So only a small fraction, roughly that 10%, actually gets stored as new cow tissue muscle, fat that the wolf can then consume and use.
Wow. Okay, so let's put numbers on that. If the grass level starts with, say, 10,000 units of energy,
The cow, eating the grass, only gets about 1,000 of those units stored in its body.
then the wolf eats the cow. It only gets about 100 units.
Yep. And finally, the bear eats the wolf.
It gets a measly 10 units.
Exactly. You've gone from 10,000 units at the producer level down to just 10 units at the tertiary consumer level. That's a huge drop-off.
That explains perfectly why the chains have to be short. To support another level, a theoretical fifth-level predator eating the bear.
You'd need an absolutely impossible amount of grass at the bottom to funnel even a tiny bit of energy that far up. The energy just runs out.
So the pyramid shape is literal in terms of energy. Wide base, tiny top.
Precisely. And this 10% rule, this inefficiency, has another really important consequence, one that wasn't in the original simple chain example, but is critical, especially for us humans.
Oh, what's that?
It relates to things that aren't energy, things like toxins or pollutants. It's a concept called biomagnification.
Biomagnification. Okay, break that down.
Well, think about it. While energy is lost by 90% at each step, persistent toxins, things like mercury or certain pesticides that organisms absorb from their environment, they aren't easily burned off or excreted.
So they stick around in the body tissues.
They do. So if small organisms at the bottom absorb a tiny bit of toxin, the primary consumer eats lots of them, accumulating all their toxin load, then the secondary consumer eats lots of those.
Ah, so while the energy goes down drastically at each level, the concentration of the toxin goes up.
Dramatically up. That toxin gets more and more concentrated as you move up the food chain. So those apex predators, the ones at the top getting the least energy.
They end up with the highest concentration of contaminants.
Wow. Yeah, it's a serious issue. Think about warnings about mercury levels in large predatory fish like tuna or swordfish. That's biomagnification in action. They eat lots of smaller fish, concentrating the mercury from all of them.
That adds a whole other layer of, well, danger to being at the top. It's not just about energy scarcity.
It absolutely connects the low energy efficiency to the vulnerability of top predators, and potentially to us if we eat them.
Okay, so these neat little food chains, like our grass cow wolf bear example, are great for understanding the energy flow.
But nature's rarely that simple.
Exactly. It's usually much more tangled. Which leads us to the idea of a food web.
Yeah, the food web is a much more realistic picture. It shows all the interconnected feeding relationships in an ecosystem, multiple chains all overlapping.
It brings in that complexity, like omnivores, animals that don't just stick to one trophic level,
Right. Let's take our bear again. That bear might eat berries.
making it a primary consumer in that moment.
Then it might catch and eat a mouse that ate seeds.
Now it's acting as a secondary consumer.
But then it goes fishing and catches a big salmon, and that salmon ate smaller fish.
Suddenly, the bear is a tertiary consumer. It jumps around.
Exactly. Most animals, especially omnivores, feed at multiple trophic levels depending on what's available. The web captures that messy reality.
Which inevitably brings us to
Yeah.
us, humans.
Yeah.
Where do we fit into this picture? The source materials seem to wrestle with this a bit,
Yeah, it's a complex question. We are clearly omnivores. We eat plants, corn, rice, vegetables.
putting us at the primary consumer level,
Then we eat chicken or beef animals that are primary consumers.
making us secondary consumers,
And then, as we just discussed, we eat large predatory fish like tuna.
putting us potentially high up as secondary or even tertiary consumers,
Yeah.
and exposing us to that biomagnification.
Right, so we operate across multiple levels. But the bigger debate point raised was, are humans just another apex predator within the natural web, or are we something else, something kind of operating outside the normal rules?
What's the argument for being outside?
Well, think about what normally limits apex predator populations. It's usually food availability, that 10% rule again, or sometimes disease, or their own predators when they're young. Humans.
Mhm.
We don't really have natural predators controlling our global population.
And we manipulate our food supply on a massive scale. Agriculture, fishing.
Exactly. Our technology allows us to bypass many of the natural constraints. We alter habitats globally, impact climate, use industrial farming. We're not just in the web, we are actively reshaping the entire web on a planetary scale. That makes our position unique and arguably outside the typical predator definition.
That's a powerful point. We're like a super omnivore with global reach and technology, and that power has consequences for the fragility of these webs. Which brings up another key concept, keystone species.
Ah, yes, keystone species. This is such a cool idea. A keystone species is an organism whose impact on its ecosystem is disproportionately large relative to its abundance.
Like the keystone in an arch, the one at the top holding everything together.
That's the metaphor, exactly. If you pull that keystone species out, the whole structure can collapse or change dramatically, even if that species wasn't the most numerous one there.
And the classic example, which was detailed in the research, involves wolves, right?
The reintroduction of gray wolves into Yellowstone National Park is probably the most famous and clear-cut example. Wolves are tertiary consumers there, mainly eating elk and deer, which are primary consumers.
Okay, so what happened when the wolves are gone?
When wolves were eradicated from Yellowstone decades ago, the elk population exploded. Without their main predator, there were just too many elk.
And they ate a lot.
They ate everything. They overgrazed vegetation, especially young aspen and willow trees, particularly along rivers and streams.
Which doesn't sound that bad, maybe. Fewer trees?
But the knock-on effects were huge. Losing those trees and shrubs along the riverbanks led to increased soil erosion. The banks became unstable, the rivers widened and became shallower. This damaged habitats for fish and amphibians.
Wow, so removing one predator changed the physical landscape.
Dramatically. But then, when wolves were reintroduced in the 1990s,
They started controlling the elk population again.
yes, they didn't kill all the elk, but they kept them moving, preventing them from lounging by the rivers and eating everything in sight. This allowed the aspen and willow to recover,
And the recovering trees?
stabilized the riverbanks, the rivers narrowed and deepened again, pools formed. This created better habitats, which led to an increase in beaver populations, who built dams, creating even more diverse habitats for fish, birds, and insects.
Incredible. So bringing back that one keystone species triggered this cascade of positive changes throughout the entire ecosystem.
It completely restructured the landscape and boosted biodiversity. It perfectly illustrates how interconnected everything is in a food web and how vital certain species can be.
And it underscores what the sources were saying about human impact. We often disrupt these webs, sometimes without even realizing the full consequences, through things like overfishing, cutting down forests, hunting specific animals.
We're often pulling out keystones or drastically altering the numbers at multiple trophic levels simultaneously.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the absolute essentials we've hit today.
Right. So, first, we define the key players: primary consumers eating plants, secondary consumers eating primary consumers, and tertiary consumers eating secondary consumers. The basic structure.
Then the huge one, the 10% rule. Only about a tenth of the energy moves up each level, meaning energy dramatically decreases towards the top.
Which explains why food chains are short and why top predators are relatively rare. And it also leads to that worrying phenomenon of biomagnification, where toxins concentrate as you go up the chain.
We also shifted from simple chains to the more realistic, complex food web, acknowledging omnivores and interconnectedness.
And we touched upon the unique, powerful, and sometimes disruptive role of humans within or perhaps outside these natural systems, and the critical importance of keystone species holding ecosystems together.
Absolutely. Food chains show who eats what, but food webs and understanding energy flow show how all life is connected and interdependent from the sun, powering the plants right down to the decomposers that recycle nutrients back into the system. You should now feel pretty expert on trophic levels.
That wraps up our deep dive into the energy pyramid and food webs.
But before we go, we always like to leave you with a final thought to chew on, something building on what we discussed. Okay, so thinking about everything we've learned, the energy limits, the interconnectedness, biomagnification, keystone species, and especially the powerful impact of humans through pollution, habitat destruction, climate change. If you had to pick one, which trophic level, primary, secondary, or tertiary consumers do you think is the most vulnerable, the most at risk right now? And why? Something to ponder.